Welcome to Business World One-on-One. Today, we're tackling a topic that's more important than ever, corporate sustainability. In this era of climate change, sustainable business practices are a moral imperative and an economic necessity. The business sector is embracing sustainable practices and strategies, but it needs to find a balance between profitability and sustainability. We're here with Tim Daniels, consultant for investor relations and sustainability at SM Investments Corp. We'll talk about the importance of corporate sustainability and SM's sustainability journey. So sustainability has been a buzzword for several years now, or maybe even decades. But is it more than just a buzzword? And how important is it for companies to continue to pursue sustainability?
I think it's definitely more than a buzzword, although this is clearly a field which is rife with buzzwords. I mean, sustainability can be made very, very complicated in the way we talk about it, the acronyms, the number of frameworks out there. And that has proliferated in recent years. But as a concept and as a way of running a business, I think sustainability has been here for a long time. And very responsible and aware companies have been pursuing it for a long time, of which I think SM really is one. So I think sustainability is something that good businesses do, sometimes without knowing it, and sometimes very consciously, because it makes them better businesses, and it helps them plan for the future and make all of their stakeholders win as they look for what the business really needs. So I guess my answer is it's not a fad. It's what good companies do, and it makes you a stronger company, and it makes all of your partners and your growth better as well.
Can you share with us the SM Group's sustainability journey? Like, how does it align with the overall corporate strategy and the global standards, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
If we're talking about the journey, I think we have to go quite far back in time, actually, because the founder of the group, Henry C., I think the principles of sustainability were very much embedded in the way he built the group from the very beginning. So I think we often talk about a perspective that he had, that business growth and social development go hand in hand. It's not a case of either or. It's a case of, particularly when we look at the context of the Philippines, if you're trying to grow a very large business that serves many consumers and it has a complicated supply chain, and you have a big physical footprint, you have to think about the needs of those people. And you have to think about how your business is going to help all of those groups develop and become more of a developed economy and serving the many needs of your stakeholders. Because that's how you grow your business, right? You have to do it so that everybody moves up together. So I think this concept of sustainability was there very early on. Now, what's happened is, as we got into recent years, people have thought a lot more consciously about this. And in our case, we realized that we really needed to respond to the need to talk about it, probably within the last decade, because people in financial markets or people who look at specific issues have asked for more information and more transparency. And there's been more of a requirement and expectation on companies to talk about it. And that's where all of these frameworks and sustainability reports and things come in. But actually for us, it began very early on. So, if I talk about our journey a bit more specifically, I think there have been a number of points where you can see how that thinking prompted initiatives or business directions because it was the right thing to do. And examples would be in our property business, for example. It makes a lot of business sense to look at your energy efficiency, to look at your water recycling and reuse, to look at your waste segregation, because these are just parts of being a very efficient property business or a very efficient mall operator. They're also very important sustainability topics. But as the leadership of our businesses have looked at how to grow responsibly, it's naturally led them into very sustainable solutions as they develop. That has then moved us into things like preparing for disasters and looking at climate change, where SM actually dedicates about 10% of its capex every year about 10% of our capex, which is mostly in the property group, goes very specifically into disaster resilient features so that we are preparing for the future and we're anticipating sustainability needs. Other parts of our group, like the retailing, focus very much on consumers, right? So sustainability leads us in the direction of what do consumers want? And they want more green choices. So we've come up with programs to do things that give them more access to green shopping behaviors and educate them. We call it green finds, and you can find the tags when you go into our department stores. So we're responding to consumers' needs as well. And then you end up with bigger things like, we need more renewable energy in this country in order to address climate change. We'd like to move to all renewable energy in our businesses, but there isn't enough available. So that's why we look at financing solutions with BDO. They're funding 59 renewable energy projects across the country. And at the parent company, we're also investing directly in geothermal steam. All of these might sound in isolation like we're responding to a sustainability headline or a banner under the SDGs. But actually, they're all business decisions that make sense for growing our business, making us a stronger business, and working with all of our stakeholders.
So do you find that consumers are responding well? Like, for example, for SMDC, the projects, if these are like disaster resilient projects, do you find that there's a demand from the consumers that these projects like have those sustainability components?
There are some things that consumers see and they ask for, they want, right? I think particularly among younger generations, and we're a quite young country here in the Philippines, there's a strong awareness of wanting to do things responsibly and right. And that particularly affects, I think, more of our retail arm, where we know people want more information to make good choices. But I think they also respond very well to things where they see that we're looking after the environment. Like things I've just mentioned, like water usage or electricity usage or waste collection, or cleanup programs or tree planting or mangrove planting, or if you go to our hotel in Hamilo Coast in the Pico de Loro, they like the fact that there's no single-use plastic anymore. They like the fact that a lot of the food on the table is coming from local farmers. It's a farm-to-table offering that we give them. They really respond to that, right? Even the waste that comes out of those restaurants is used with vermiculture. They use worms literally to turn the waste into fertilizer, which goes back to the farms so that they can produce more of the food, and it's a circular process. So people respond very well to that because I think there's a strong awareness today that you have to come up with responsible solutions and things which is going to help us protect our very unique environment here in the Philippines.
Yeah. So you touched on the topic of climate change. As you know, the Philippines is vulnerable to climate change, right? Especially we experienced like the recent typhoons, plus the rising temperatures and everything. So how prepared do you think are conglomerates to handle these challenges?
I mean, climate change is probably the number one topic that people think about when you use the word sustainability. And that's actually a fair thing to do when you look at the Philippines because, as you point out, we're one of, people say we're one of the top 3 most vulnerable countries. But by the way, we only produce about 0.4 to 0.5% of the world's greenhouse gases. So we really are one of the smallest contributors while being one of the biggest recipients of what's going to happen. And we see it in the typhoons and other things happening. So it's really relevant to the Philippines. Dealing with climate change falls into 2 kind of buckets, right? One is everybody has to be responsible in reducing the amount of the problem they create. So we are looking across all of our businesses to find ways to reduce our impact and be responsible. That's the first category of things that we need to do. Probably the best example is in SM Prime, where today over half of the electricity usage comes from renewable sources. And we're looking for similar initiatives in each of our businesses across the group. The second category of dealing with climate change is very relevant in the Philippines. We need to prepare for what's likely to come our way. And that's why we spend 10% of our capex every year in building disaster resilient features into all of our businesses and preparing for what might happen. This thinking goes back, in our case, at least 20 years. Here in the Mall of Asia complex, it was designed over 20 years ago, thinking about what might happen with climate change. So when we have typhoons, you notice this area is very resilient. It doesn't really flood, it's very stable, we can protect the assets here, we can look after our tenants and our people and our communities. And that design thinking is at the forefront of how we build out our malls across the country. Another example would be in Marikina. I think people are aware that that area is quite prone to flooding. So we designed a mall and built it literally situated on top of over 200 stilts so that the floodwaters go underneath. That also means we can try and catch some of that water and protect the downstream communities. So it's very practical things that corporates should do to protect their own assets. And if you do it right, you can also look after, in our case, our tenants, the community around us, which is very supportive of us being there. And we can try and make sure that everybody is gaining from how we think about dealing with climate change.
So can you share with us like some of the biggest challenges that SM has encountered in its sustainability journey? Maybe what lessons SM learned that other companies embarking on their sustainability journey can learn from SM?
I think it's quite overwhelming if you're looking at sustainability for the first time and you'd see this as a journey with so many things to think about. So one of the first things you have to realize is it's not a trade-off between doing good business or doing sustainable business. It's actually the same thing. What you're looking at is many of these decisions are going to reduce my costs. Many of these decisions are going to bring me closer to my customers or my suppliers. And that's actually going to help me with being a stronger sales and community effort down the line. And then a lot of sustainability is also thinking about the long-term risks, which a business should be thinking about. How do you do that is, I think you have to pull back for a second and not get hung up on the frameworks and ask yourself, what is the short list of really material things that will affect my business? The UN Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them, right? Yeah. And in our case, when we looked at it with the SM Group lens over the whole thing, we realized that our various businesses were dealing with all 17. It seems overwhelming, but the more we challenged ourselves on what's really material to the group, we realized that different SDGs are higher priority for different parts of the group. So, for our property business, it's very much about the design of building communities and livable cities for the future. In our banks, they have a big role to play in funding renewable energy and climate change initiatives, which is why BDO has been raising green bonds and blue bonds, and they're funding 59 renewable energy projects. They have a really material role to play in that initiative, just as they also have a very material role to play in creating financial inclusion in this country. So they have an environmental thing and they have a social thing, where the impact they can have is particular to their banking presence, and it can be quite impactful. Our foundations look at things like healthcare and education. Our retail arm looks at how do we change consumer behavior? How can we try to influence supply chains so that manufacturers can see the benefits of doing green products and responsible sourcing? And as a group overall, we realize, we have a very big role to play in creating modern development, in creating employment, in creating economic growth, and that benefits so many people. And finally, when you get to the parent company, we realize SDG number 17, we have a big advocacy role to play because we are a significant player within the Philippines. And that means that we can put our resources behind raising awareness or trying to work with other corporates or trying to bring in international bodies. So, we work with the UN, we work with WWF, we work with GRI, many of these organizations. So I use this to point out that in our case, even though there's so much going on, we have to sit back and go, what is material? What is the short list of things that each particular business needs to focus on? And so any business going on this journey, I think that's really the first step, is realizing there's probably 2 or 3 things that are really material where you will have an impact. And that's going to also make you a better business.
So how do you think companies can balance, their sustainability push with profitability? And can companies serve their shareholders and their communities equally?
Absolutely. I don't think it's an either or. I think that's quite limited thinking. A successful long-term company thinks about its stakeholders. If we ignored the needs of our customers, we wouldn't make sales. If we ignored the need for our suppliers to be successful and to be able to operate in quite challenging environments, then we wouldn't be able to serve our customers with the choices. Nor would we have all the 20,000 tenants in our malls wouldn't be there if we didn't find ways to protect them during the pandemic, for example. Or we even have like a data protection initiatives. So we look at, say, if there's flooding and climate change, we have a backup data center for all of our data. But we also make it available for free to our tenants. Because when the mall opens after a disaster, it's not just us who needs to be present and successful, it's also our tenants, right? So you might say, oh, why would we do that for free to our tenants? Why would we do this? And the answer is, it's just a wise business decision to look after the people who make you successful. And similarly, when we look at the environment, yes, it's extra cost to design and build buildings that are energy efficient, that are disaster resilient, that recycle water, etc. Yes, it's extra cost, but we get it back by being more efficient operators. And in the long term, we really get it back by being prepared for when the worst things could happen. So there isn't a trade-off from our point of view between being responsible and being a successful business. Being a successful business means you think responsibly.
So you mentioned that the SM group allocates 10% of its capex. Is that every year for sustainability efforts?
Yes. I mean, I would qualify, first of all, that the majority of the group's capex is really in the property company, SM Prime, because they are building malls, they're building the SMDC residences, hotels, convention centers, arenas, you see the whole thing. But 10% of their capex goes into these disaster resilient features. And every site can need a different answer. So they look at the specifics of the location, they look at the needs of that community, they look at the risks, and they design the buildings in order to plan and ensure their long-term stability. Every part of the group has sustainability things that will be specific to it that is a priority for them to look at. Whether it's looking at how to design energy efficient buildings in SM Prime, how to prepare for disaster resilience or climate change, those are very property specific initiatives. In our retailing arm, it's very customer facing initiatives or things where we work with suppliers so that we really introduce more green habits and more green products into the country. In our banks, it's a lot of looking at how do we create financial inclusion. The Philippines is a country where really not many people have access to modern banking. And so raising the level of awareness and access is a priority for BDO, as is funding green and blue projects and renewable energy. So I think it's different for each part of the group. But as a group overall, I think we're very aware of some cross-cutting things, of which climate change is probably the biggest. And also economic development, helping to create employment, helping create modern retailing and banking and property across the country so that we are serving more Filipinos, increasingly reaching out into the provinces to help, develop people's needs as a country. That's something we do as our core business. feedback from consumer research, which told us that most Filipinos, over 70% of people who kind of responded to big surveys would say they would prefer to make green choices in their shopping behaviors. The barriers to that for them is, there's only so much more they're willing to pay because, of course, people have tight wallets, right? But the other concern they had was they just don't know what's a sustainable choice and what's not. Now, we can't tell people what to buy, nor can we tell manufacturers what to produce. But we realized we do sit in the middle as a retailer. And what we can do is we can educate everybody and make people aware. So what the Green Fines is really intended to do is to work with the manufacturers, our suppliers, to highlight the products that consumers have said they're more interested in. And then if we make it very easy for consumers to make those choices, what happens is people buy more of those products. And that in turn shows manufacturers and suppliers that they should probably think about doing more things that meet these consumers' needs. And over time, you change behaviors in a way that Filipino consumers have quite clearly said they would like to do it. So our role here is to try and educate and to try and create the route to market and highlight the shopping choices that give people green options within the budgets that they have available.
So what advice would you give companies on how they can speed up their sustainability strategies, move the needle in terms of their sustainability efforts?
I think don't overcomplicate it. If you want to move fast, find the things that really matter and focus on those, because every business will have one or two or three things that are fairly unique to that business that will be relatively obvious. And then that will be a big difference already, and it will naturally lead you into other areas. I think most businesses will recognize they can lower their costs if they look at more energy efficiency, they can use a water recycling, they can use waste segregation, they can design their properties better. I mean, it's not a trade-off to think about how we can lower our costs by the way we plan our business. And then on the revenue side, the more you respond to what your customers want, because customers want green choices, that's also going to make you a stronger business. A big part of sustainability is also looking beyond this year's financials. It's looking ahead and saying a bit of investment is going to help us prepare for future risks, and it's also going to open up some of these opportunities. So, the leadership of businesses just needs to take a step back and ask, what would be the two or three things that would make a big difference, and actually just commit to doing that. A related point to that is, it doesn't happen by accident. Successful businesses, successful sustainable businesses, it comes from the top. It comes from a decision that we're going to become more responsible and sustainable over time, and that will make us a more successful business. And that tone from the top is really important in getting everybody around the organization to think about what they can do.
Okay, transparency and accountability are very important these days, not just in the Philippines, but around the world. And I believe SM was one of the first companies to come out with sustainability reports, even before it was required by the SEC. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, thank you. I think we've been fairly early adopters of high levels of transparency and accountability, and that was very deliberate. There's been a long history of doing sustainability inside SM, but we really started to understand, I'd say within the last 10 years, that people want us to talk about it more, particularly foreign investment and the foreign, in the global community of business and stakeholders. They want us to explain what we're doing so that they can really understand some of the critical issues that are happening. And we started to hear that through our engagements with foreign investors in particular. So it wasn't a case of us taking on sustainability. It was a case of us initially explaining what we were already doing and how we thought that our business growth and our responsible behaviors are actually the same thing. Once we started that journey, we very quickly learned about all of the international frameworks and standards and quite the breadth of things that people wanted to know more about. So we stepped up our game in terms of that reporting, and we adopted many of these frameworks. It was in response to a request that we felt was very legitimate, and we wanted people to understand us because we actually believe we're quite responsible. As time has gone on, that has become an expectation on everybody. And for us, it's allowed us to become advocates in a number of areas. And it's allowed us to use that sustainable thinking to push new areas of development within our group. And start to think more creatively about some of the solutions in sustainable areas. It's a journey that just gains momentum. And the reporting is a part of all of that we recognized fairly early on would be of benefit to everybody.
Okay, what legacy do you think SM wants to leave in terms of sustainability, and how are you working towards that vision?
I think if we're talking about the long-term future of the group and what we hope to accomplish, we still see ourselves as fairly early on in the journey of where we can go. So even in our big businesses today, we still see so much development and growth opportunity around the Philippines, creating modern retailing, creating property, creating inclusive banking, more renewable energy, better logistics. All of these sectors still have many, many decades of growth to go because actually most Filipinos aren't yet formally included in those sectors. So we do look very long term, and we think we have a tremendous amount to contribute in the areas where we are experts. I think how we want to do it is to create win-wins for everybody. So we want to make sure that as we build out our properties and as we build out our retailing, etc., we are serving more customers, we are meeting their needs and raising their living standards. We are looking after our tenants, we're making them stronger, better businesses in the malls that we operate. We are looking after supply chains and helping people get route to market, and to do that in ways where they can be stronger businesses. And ultimately, all of this, it works together to build out the communities, our host communities where we operate. At the same time, we're looking at the environmental challenges in the Philippines. And we want to make sure that we're being responsible in protecting our environment, our biodiversity, the things the Philippines is very unique for. And we also prepare ourselves for many of the risks that unfortunately we do see coming. So I think our legacy is really, how do we elevate all of the businesses? How do we scale up? How do we do more? But in a way that all of our stakeholders, all of the stakeholder groups that we work with and the environment is better and more protected in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Daniels, for such an enlightening discussion on corporate sustainability. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed the opportunity.
It's becoming increasingly clear that as businesses seek to balance growth with environmental and social responsibilities, the path forward requires commitment, creativity, and collaboration. We hope this discussion has given our audience insights on how they can drive meaningful change. Thank you for joining us today.